you can look at hiring in its own kind of siloed self, but it's got to be mapped to kind of strategic plans and goals and activities and projects that you need to be having ongoing. Loyalty in many respects is dead in the workplace, and I think it's something that workplaces now need to do so much more to make their permanent employees feel secure. Organisations are moving into skills-based hiring anyway, where they're thinking more from a less so I'm going to need a team of X to do this. They're more so thinking, you know, here are the projects and programs I'm going to have going on. These are the outcomes I want to reach, and therefore what skill sets do I need to map to those outcomes.
Thanks for coming on to the podcast today. I'm really excited to dive into today's topic. I think with growth and with hiring, especially as it's kind of more pressing in today's market, it seems, coming into this year. I think it's a really important topic to kind of discuss, how clients can be most effective, and probably just to highlight some misconceptions around, scaling on demand, interim hiring, and I guess to share from your kind of insights where you see that to be a really effective kind of approach. So before we do get into it, we'd love to obviously find out a bit about yourself. So if you could share some kind of background into what you've been getting up to, that would be great.
Of course. So I'm Suzy, so I'm the head of growth at a company called Fresh Minds, where we do a lot of on-demand and research consultancy for our clients. My background kind of has always been kind of temporary talent in a weird, bizarre way, but I was the temporary talent for many years. So kind of when I started my career post-university, I was a management consultant for many years. So trained in that respect, was mainly in public sector for that whole time. I then kind of saw quite a fundamental problem in the public sector, and I was quite keen to try and find a way to fix it, or find a tech platform that might be able to help fix it. So I quit my job. I joined an incubator for a VC fund. Met two co-founders and we started our own business, namely Ditto. We were VC backed kind of August 2023, and then we just ran at a temporary talent solution, which was actually quite a novel one, which was around sharing your permanent talent across organisations when they weren't needed so much, or where that skill set might be needed more in another organisation for a short period of time. So kind of a new take on temporary talent. And then I found myself going into Fresh Minds. So when Ditto kind of came to a neat ending, joined the Fresh Minds team, and I was really excited by their approach around on-demand consultancy, which was kind of both of my two experiences combined to one, but also their in-house research consultancy. And it was just a novel way of kind of providing that management consultancy skill set to clients a bit more on demand in a way that feels a bit more future of work-esque. So yeah, that's me in a nutshell.
Nice. And it's an interesting one. I think when we met, we kind of identified quite an interesting crossover, because a lot of my focus in Wave is supporting with either contract staffing or those consultancy services. Yeah. And as I'd kind of touched on briefly to begin with, I think that when we're working with clients as they're looking to kind of scale up their operations, there can be a lot of misconceptions into hiring on demand and that kind of interim approach. So I would love to kind of hear from your side, I guess, what your kind of take on that is, and I guess the kind of advantages that can bring companies with that whole scale on demand approach.
Totally. So I think the biggest misconception, which I think we bonded quite a lot over in the early days of us meeting, was around just the obvious one, which is it's incredibly expensive. Like, it's always going to be more expensive than hiring permanently. And I think that misconception is so bizarre in this world, especially when, the freelance economy is booming. And generally, more skill sets are residing there now. So not only is there a misconception around price, but you're almost having to push that harder because there's a bigger freelance community and more people wanting to be a freelancer today. I think generally, it is always interesting doing the economic breakdown. I think when you actually look at whether it's more expensive, of course, in many respects it's not. So permanent employees, you're more than often having to pay for their benefits, you're having to hire, the cost of hiring them, cost of training them, and then if you no longer need that permanent employee, the cost of making them redundant, that whole life cycle cost is always it's more than often more expensive. And also more damaging, and I think that's something we don't talk about enough. If you're thinking about that employee and their well-being, bringing someone on for a temporary role permanently and then letting them go, they've then built themselves in that culture of that organisation. They want to be there long term. They're built into their motivation and the North Star of that organisation. So I think, yes, there's a cost to temporary hiring, absolutely. I would say the whole life cycle cost of a permanent hire is potentially the same, if not higher. And I think there's also a piece around strategically, probably far less costly from a PR cultural perspective too, being able to look at a temporary workforce as a really nice neat layer to go on top of your kind of core nuclear workforce. So yeah, that's the biggest misconception I would say. It's always around price.
Yeah, and I also see that, that whole kind of opportunity cost element as well, right? Because, with that, with those kind of permanent hires and the longer term growth, there's always of course, the longer processes. It takes a lot of time to find those hires for a lot of organisations because they're looking for that silver bullet, the perfect candidate. And often when we have our permanent kind of staffing team as well, what we'll find is, it's taking businesses 2-3 months to find the right people. And at that point, what haven't they been able to deliver internally? How much have they fallen behind? What's this person going to have to then, go into and catch up on? Yeah. And how does that kind of also affect that employee's well-being, but the expectations on them, but also then kind of falling behind in projects and life cycles and stuff like that. So it's kind of, I guess, being more aware of potentially and more open to the case of having those interim solutions in place, even if you are, you have that preference of long-term growth and I guess the stability, to make sure that you aren't falling behind and you're on track to where you need to be.
Yeah, totally. And I think that's where there's always that collision, isn't there? You can look at hiring in its own kind of siloed self, but it's got to be mapped to kind of strategic plans and goals and activities and projects that you need to be having ongoing. And I think if anyone were to start of the year, it's 2025, if everyone was to kind of have a look at their plan as a business for the next 12 months, I think you could pretty well bet where you're likely to hire quite a lot and where that hiring could well be contingent, purely because no one's in a place where they can go, I'm going to need that permanent skill set for the next 3 years.
Yeah.
And I think, especially look at COVID, it changed everything.
Yeah.
I think the type of skill sets you suddenly needed were changing. And then if you look at wider market trends and just the trends of what's going on in the workplace, not only are employees, the retention cycle is so much shorter, like people are moving jobs so much more frequently, especially Gen Z, Gen Alpha, who want that portfolio career. Not only are they probably not going to stay with you for the long term, but it's more often than not, you might not need that skill set for the long term. So it's worth thinking about, okay, well, they're the market trends anyway. If there's going to be a bigger freelancer community, how can we start using that to our advantage? And what projects are we going to need? And which ones are we likely to be hiring for? And therefore, can we siphon a big segment of our workforce hiring off to, okay, contingent, because it makes more sense and it's less risky, especially with who can predict what's going to happen in the next year?
Yeah, and I think, like you say, COVID was such a pillar in that kind of shift, because it just goes to show that you don't know what is in front of you, and as much as you think you can look years ahead into where you want the business to be or where you want employees to be, anything can happen that can change that. And I think it also combines quite nicely with the fact that there's so many more candidates on the market now that have always ever only been open to permanent positions that have unfortunately lost their jobs because of redundancies. They've always had that conception of, I guess, permanent positions being more secure, and now it's the case that actually there's not really too much difference in being made redundant or finishing a contract and having to find a new opportunity or a consultant engagement. So it's we've definitely seen a real big shift in I guess that to become more of a popular option, just because of that misconception of security not being a thing anymore, which is an interesting one.
It is so interesting. I think if you were to look at the employee psychology, gosh, I'd be fascinated by it. I would love to hear from some sort of behavioural scientist about it, because I think, loyalty in many respects is dead in the workplace, and I think it's something that workplaces now need to do so much more to make their permanent employees feel secure. Look at Meta, like it's a perfect example. 5% of their workforce is going to be made redundant. Announcement, a couple of days ago. Now that's happened probably for the last 5 years. We keep seeing these big tech players making these massive redundancies, and the reasoning is so bizarre. The reasoning that they use externally is we're getting rid of the low performers. Now I don't know about you, but I don't think I know one single low performer that works at Meta, and I think when that is the current exposure of all employees, they're going to be looking at other options that kind of build in that flexibility to their career, where they don't need to think so much about that security piece because it's more in their control, or they're going to think really differently about permanent employment, and they're going to constantly be on the lookout for that next opportunity for their own security and their own safety. And I think that's not me saying that's awful of organisations. I think it's quite the opposite. I think they're actually in a really difficult position to not always be able to, hold security for their permanent employees. And I think being able to change that narrative and say, okay, we're going to think about this more holistically and not take the risk of always doing permanent employees just in case, and maybe just take that more adaptable approach. I think it's just stronger for company culture as a whole.
Yeah, it definitely helps to kind of, I guess, protect their brand, right? Because, we have candidates that we'll speak to now that wouldn't ever go near a certain company because they heard of the horror stories of how, they handled the redundancies and stuff like that. And with consultants, with contractors, that is just part of, that is just part of what you do, right? You go into a project, you finish up and you move on to the next one. So it kind of helps to take away that, I guess, that part for businesses as well, which can, I think a lot of businesses have been kind of, have been burnt by over the course of the last few years, where they might not have necessarily have handled things as well as they could have. And now, how able are they to attract top talent, whether that's consultants, whether that's permanent hires. So it's always an interesting one to consider.
And I think we have the complete other end of the spectrum. Sorry, we are massively going on about this, but it's so interesting.
Yeah,
we have
sure.
the other end of the spectrum, which is we have some clients that are incredibly forward-thinking when it comes to this type of approach. I'm just thinking of a client in my mind right now who had someone in for 4 months to do almost a target operating model piece, which was one of our consultants. Brilliant piece, and then that kind of ended and they were like, cool, brilliant. Now, not only does the employee know that the skill sets that they need next is not them, but also the client is sitting there going, okay, I now know far more about what I need in that project team. And I think it's just working far more effectively and strategically when it comes to hiring is, I need this right now, and it's very clear. That employee knows that is the piece of work that they're doing, that's the project that they're there to do. And then it's just a very clear ending if that project skill set is not needed past that point, and maybe they need a different type of project skill set. How much more efficient and effective as a model is that compared to let's hire one permanent person, take the risk that we're going to need them past 6 months, and if we don't, it's a really brutal process of removing them. So yeah, I agree.
Yeah, that was actually going to be part of my next question of how businesses how this can help businesses to kind of become more agile. And I think we definitely see it with a lot of the startups that we work with, right? They're building their founding team, they're not too sure exactly what it is that they need, what type of profile they're going to be able to both most kind of benefit from, and having that that interim solution in place just helps them to tweak as and when they need to, and it protects employee well-being from not being pulled from pillar to post in a position that might not be suited to them, but it also just helps a business more to kind of, I guess, to build more practically what good looks like, and also helps them for future roadmap of I guess what that ideal kind of person or team looks like. So what's your kind of your thoughts on that and your take?
Yeah, it's interesting because we work with kind of small to medium organisations, but we work with a lot of big brands as well. And I think their approach might be slightly different to a startup. Having been in a startup and run a startup business, you're always thinking about your price point, and you're always thinking about what can you actually spend your runway on, and what is the most effective ROI. And there's always that worry about when you make your first hire, you want them to either be an absolute hell yes, or you want them to be someone who could come in and do some really quick, effective work, and then they effectively move on. So I think contingent hiring is a huge sell in that respect. I think from a big brand perspective, I often find the best way for them to look at it, in my opinion anyway, is seeing it more of a partnership ecosystem. So rather than having one partner of, okay, that's my partner for any contingent hiring, that's how I'm going to do it, you have a really neat strategic thought process around which partners am I going to go to for certain things. So there might be a partner that that is incredibly good at tech and product hiring. Brilliant. They're your trusted partner when it comes to product and tech hiring. Why? Because you've built a really brilliant relationship with them. They know your business. They know what you need in that respect and in that type of hiring pool. They know what to look for. They know your culture. And it's just a really nice safeguard to contingent hiring for maybe one area. But on top of that, you'll have the likes of Upwork for those kind of shorter pieces, or Fiverr, for example. But then you have partnerships for lots of other things, and I think that way you've got a really strong ecosystem that can help you with your contingent hiring, but also help inform your contingent hiring. Because I think one thing, and I will happily say you're an expert, Daisy, I think lots of partners in that ecosystem know and have lived this for so many years, and they know what works and what doesn't, and where they've seen this in other businesses, especially if your focus is startup like it is here. I think you know what works in startups at early stage or kind of growth stage, and you'll know what the type of people are to look for. Now, I was not a hiring expert when I started my startup. I needed that expertise. Luckily, one of my co-founders was extremely expert in that space. But, you need that expertise because that's useful. It's another safeguard in many ways to making those hires, having someone who's a bit of an expert in that space and has seen and tried it before elsewhere.
Yeah, I think it kind of falls into, I guess, with our approach, right? Everything's very much community driven, having like the podcast series and the workshops and the events. It's like it all falls into having this like embedded approach and that level of understanding. And I think a lot of the projects that I'll focus on will be like within the transformation space. And I think partnerships is so key because you can lean on each other when you need to, right? And especially when you're having to scale, extremely quickly, and you can kind of like outsource that in a way where there isn't as much risk, and you just have that understanding and alignment from the start, and it just kind of helps to provide I guess a lot of time saved, right?
Definitely.
Which is always great.
And I love that community network part because I think we very much foster that with our consultants that work with us because, and this is where that misconception comes in of speed. I think very often clients will, when they think about contingent hiring, they're often thinking about, well, you're just trying to get a quick sale. You're trying to farm someone out to us and great, you make your quick buck. It's quite the opposite because I think, some of our consultants have used us on 10 plus projects. So they've come back to us time and time again because we know them and we want to successfully place them. So it's not a matter of us saying, okay, we'll place someone for you, no problem, we'll find someone for you. Often if we're not best placed, we'll say, look, this isn't our expertise area and we don't have someone that we love and trust that we can put into your organisation. So actually, here's some trusted partners that we'd refer you to. And I think it's so important for us to foster our community of candidates, not just, our clients, because that for us, we can't be successful unless we have phenomenal candidates, and luckily we do, that we can put into projects. So, yeah.
And obviously you see, and we've kind of spoke about, agility being a big piece there, and helping clients to be more agile with that setup. How have you seen it with, I guess, like businesses being able to operate more kind of like creatively, or just generally speaking, like any real benefits that it brings, operating with contingent teams as opposed to, those standard kind of setups?
I think, this goes back to my consulting days. I think having a bench of almost employees that you can dial up or dial down at any point to help you with something where their skill sets are really, really well aligned, not only is that hugely beneficial ROI, but also when you are trying to get some new insight into a new market or something where you're wanting to grow your own business and you're trying to think, how do we grow that? You don't necessarily have those expertise in-house. I think the ability to be able to say, right, can you come on board, help us with a quick bit of piece of work to try and get us to understand our business better or where we could grow. I think it's a really neat ability to be able to kind of dial in that skill set when you require it and dial it down when you don't need it. So I think for us, we find a lot of our clients find that hugely beneficial, not just from a skill sets we don't necessarily have in-house and we're bringing them in, but also the adaptability and the flexibility point. You're able to do that on demand, but in a way that's good to the employee and good to your business. So it's not speed, lack of quality, it's very much, I've got these partners, I know they can deliver me really brilliant skill sets, and I have this problem, like help me figure out who I need to bring in to help solve this problem, or think about this problem more so that I can be in a better position to solve the problem. So I think it's a really neat way of thinking about your business strategy, less so actually your hiring strategy. And I think so often we think, okay, our hiring strategy is going to be X, but actually it's all about where do you want to grow as a business and what do you want to do next, and use your hiring strategy to kind of use as levers in many ways to help you achieve those things. I don't know about you, what have you found?
It's funny you say that. I think one of the main kind of, I guess, objections that we'd get from our side is, when you're scaling with that approach, it's that kind of the skill gap, right, that they leave behind, but what's not necessarily considered is what they're able to upskill in that period of time of like being engaged, and what they're able to contribute to, and to how they're able to educate others across the organisation. It's more so the focus on, well, they come and they go, so where's that like added benefit as opposed to everything that happens in between. And I guess really popular kind of setup from our side that we've seen is I mentioned like the transformation space. A lot of my like podcast is in that space, and a lot of the projects we work on are transformations, and having that flexibility and that option to work in a contingent basis means that the business can operate as effectively as they are across BAU without, you know, having to pull employees from place to place. They can sit, you know, keep the lights on and, you know, do what I guess keep the business running, keep the money flowing, and then the contingent teams can focus solely on that like transformation piece where, you know, there isn't necessarily expectations for BAU work. It just means that everything can run effectively without one having to kind of compromise another. And so a lot of the kind of accounts that we are working with and a lot of the projects that we'll engage with are more transformation piece type work as opposed to your standard day-to-day. But then I still think that there's a lot of value add that you can get in deploying people in your standard day-to-day type setups too. And I think it just comes with that education as well.
It's like bringing new hires into an organisation. Like they always have a new view on something that you've done as BAU for years, and they'll kind of say, well, have you thought about doing it like this? You know, it's a really beneficial second opinion. And you're quite right, it stops the disturbing of BAU, so you can crack on and keep going as your organisation, but you're bringing in people who might give you that second opinion without disrupting anything. I really like that. Yeah, and
I think it for us, typically because of the setups that we operate in, it can be seen as like a separate team, a separate department, and a lot of the time it is because they're delivering something different to, you know, to the wider business. But obviously there are projects that we will engage with where, you know, they're integrated into the teams, and I think again, you know, an issue that we will see is stakeholders will try to avoid working with consultants because of the setup, right, and not being able to kind of now like an environment where the dynamics are effective, where consultants can work well alongside permanent employees without it being kind of like a siloed sort of engagement. So how do you kind of how do you overcome that with, you know, with how you engage with clients and to make sure that it's effectively like deployed as opposed to just a pod here and the team here?
Gosh, it's a great question because I think it's. I mean, I felt it when I've been a consultant. We used to do things like bachelor's culture and things like that, where you would try and kind of very much integrate yourself into their team. But there's always that pushback, and I think you're quite right. What can we do differently when they land on a client site to kind of change that? And I think there's a couple of things. I think one is from actually our perspective, how can we make sure that we've nailed down whatever that role type is going to be and who they're going to work with, and making sure that those teams are aware that that person is coming on board and what does their working relationship look like. And again, I think the second part is very much comes down to what I was saying earlier, is where strategically, what are the projects and activities you're going to be doing, and therefore what is the role and responsibility of that consultant. I think when roles and responsibilities are very clearly defined, it makes it far, far easier because they're coming into a team with a set project that they need to deliver, and that team is very much seeing them as there for a purpose and a reason. I think the disruption comes when they feel like that role is a little bit blurry, and then it's very easy for the rest of the team or those teams to think, why am I not doing that then? If that's kind of a vague, blurry role and I know more about this area than you do, why are you coming in to do it? So I think making that really clear is really important. And where it's not clear, being open about that and saying, look, we're not quite sure what we need here. We need another pair of eyes. So we're bringing in someone to help with X, Y, and Z. So I think it's just, honestly, it sounds really obvious, but it is communication, transparency, us doing our job to try and get as much clarity as possible, and then hopefully having a really strong, defined role and responsibility when they land.
And so I guess as part of your area of focus, are you speaking with your consultants on how to best engage with those permanent employees as well? Or is that something for them to kind of figure out with the context that you have of the actual scope of what they're kind of expected to do?
Yeah, great question. So I think it's funny, with our candidate pool, obviously a lot of them are ex-consultants. So a lot of them have that kind of basic level of training that they do in management consultancies, which is very much about stakeholder management and engagement. So it's very much a bread and butter approach. However, saying that, I do think there is a huge emphasis on us to make sure that they land appropriately, because that's going to be the success of them and their happiness. And I think that's just as important to us. So very often we'll work with the client to understand exactly what the role's going to be and who they're going to be working with. I think there's also an approach there where, especially in the interview process, is kind of feeling out what that client is really wanting from the role, and therefore they can start understanding who am I going to be working with or where my potential challenges are. And I think making sure that we're there as almost a support function to say, if you are really challenged and you're struggling to escalate that to the client, feel free to speak to us. Like if there is a real push that you're finding, it's important that you find success in this role. The client does and we do. So we do support. We're very lucky in respect of, as I said, we have brilliant candidates.
Yeah.
So very often they'll land on a project and absolutely wow the customer, and then we are kind of hands off and they absolutely smash it. But it is something we're very considerate of, especially with, as you say, the stigma around contingent workforce.
Yeah, and I know we have obviously touched on this at the beginning around the kind of the cost efficiencies and the misconceptions there. One thing that I have noticed over the course of the last kind of year or two is a shift in, with client spending, them kind of wanting to know exactly, I guess, where their budgets are going, how effective, partnerships are, and for them to really be able to see like a clear return of investment of partnering with fresh minds or Wave Talent, whatever it might be. How do you kind of like best approach that, with like the setup that you have? Would be interesting to know.
It's such an interesting question. We actually had a really interesting internal discussion about this the other day. We partner massively for the long term. We've been really proud of our heritage as an organisation. We've been around for 25 years. We've had brilliant relationships with clients that will call us after not working with us for 10 years and be like, right, I really need to have your help on X. So I think our reputation serves us quite well in that respect. And I think it's because we are with them for the long term. So very often with our clients, we'll talk about, if this isn't right for you, we'd rather just make sure it's right for you than try and push something that doesn't work. So we very much have that open dialogue with our customers. I think it's also really important to have a discussion on what's best for them. So I know I talked a little bit about our ecosystem, but it's true, having an ecosystem of partners, it might not be that we're the right partner for something, and being able to have the integrity to say, look, we might not be best placed, but this person might be the best placed. And I think it's important that we have the ROI of the organisation in mind. I think as well, it's also being really mindful of budgets. I think in this day and age, especially this year, there is a lot of kind of cost cuts, and I think they have been for the last 2 years. I think we all felt it in kind of 2022, 23 time. Being mindful of that and being honest about it too, and being really transparent and saying, look, where does your cost base, what feels good to you, and let's see what we can work with to make sure that you get the skills and the people that you need, without kind of it kind of absolutely smashing through your budget very quickly. And that's something that just inherently, after working in public sector, I hate doing, because it's so important that you get value for money. So I think there are a few things. What do you do at Talent?
I was. I'll go into what we do. One of the main things that we have implemented. So we've hired a delivery lead called Kaya, who basically monitors like the progress of the projects that we're supporting. So she'll be speaking with the consultants on like a monthly basis. We send back like monthly status reports with like the progress that they've managed to kind of make over the course of the month, and we kind of just make sure that on like a regular basis we're in sync with our clients. Is this up to the expectations that you have? A lot of the projects that we've worked on initially have been more like cap times and materials as opposed to like outcome based. So I think that could obviously be quite easy to measure with outcomes, because it's obviously clear whether you've delivered or not. But for us, it's making sure that we're able to consistently show them that we're on track. We're delivering what we promised up until that point. And I think that's really like landed really well with our clients. It's something where they can kind of actually see the value of the price that they're paying for that level of service. But I think it does come down to like accountability that you take as a partner as well. Like you say, to not just take on like any engagement, right, just because you want to make a bit more money, a bit more money out of it. It's like, but a lot of a lot of like consultancies or agencies, they very much would be happy to do that because they want to get some revenue in. But I think it's like when you have those trusted partnerships in place where you can deliver well to this, or you won't be able to deliver as effectively to this, it just avoids that kind of process of people getting burned, and then because of that bad experience, them just not wanting to engage with consultancies or agencies again. And it's often, we see it in the agency world and we see it in the consultancy world, when stakeholders have a bad experience, they're then so, against working with agencies, regardless of them being a different partner, because it's like they the trust isn't there and they think that it's going to happen again.
Yeah, totally.
And I think it's like once you have that in place, then it, you know, as long as you're kind of holding yourself account to delivering what you actually can, then and that trust is there, which obviously does come over time, it kind of works really well.
Totally. And I think it's one thing we talk about a lot, and I think it's really easy when you really, really believe in a business model, and I think we both believe in our own business models. I think I always compare it. I always say, would you rather have almost a group of consultants who have come from one organisation and don't necessarily have the variety of skill sets that you're requiring for that project, but are just very good generalists, which, don't get me wrong, is a huge strength. I'm a big generalist myself. I think they're incredibly strong as a skill set. Or would you rather like almost an Avengers style team of freelancer consultants who not only have the 3-4 years experience as a management consultant, so make them a very strong generalist, but on top of that, they have 2 or 3 years very specific industry experience for exactly the skills that you're requiring. Like, what would you rather? And also, we talk about a lot, like we just talked about it then, like the collaboration of different brains on something. Like, there's such a strength in having 3 or 4 or 5 different brains on a piece of work. And I think having that variety and having the ability to have that variety and flexibility in who you're bringing on is only going to serve the client. And I think I very often find myself selling it because I so, believe in it.
Yeah.
I believe in it as a higher ROI likelihood than maybe your bog standard consultancy options that you have today.
Yeah, and it's the same for us. We have kind of both setups, but we definitely see that kind of Avengers Assemble approach to be more popular, because we find that I'm sure it's the same in your world as well.
Totally.
With I'm not sure if you've seen this, but we've noticed a big shift with those enterprise clients that have always typically worked with like the big four. They're now starting to kind of move away from that. They're more open to those small and medium-sized consultancies, because they ultimately can see that they'll be able to deliver more at a lower cost. And from our side, where we operate on like a virtual bench model, what it means is we can like really tap into like specific skill sets, whereas on a bench with on a physical bench, you've got more generalist skills, kind of generally speaking. And so a lot of the engagements that we've managed to land, we've landed because we can hire software engineers from specific industry backgrounds that have worked on the exact same projects, that can kind of go in and integrate seamlessly without having to kind of upskill with no context. So we've definitely seen that more popular, but then obviously there always is that demand for the generic skill sets as well, because I guess the volume is needed at times depending on the project.
100%. And I think that's kind of similar. We talked about this before, like our on-demand offering, which is very much a kind of management consulting on-demand offering. That approach is so neat when it comes to, okay, here's your general skill set, as I said, but on top of that, you've got those 2-3 years experience in industry that are very specific to exactly your kind of area, or whether it's FMCG or whether it's whatever it might be. But on top of that, you've also got kind of, they've had experience in other places. So they're going to be bringing, if you're thinking about improving your supply chain, for example, and you're in FMCG, you might not necessarily want someone who's been in FMCG in supply chain. You might want someone who's been in, I don't know, automobile industry, because they know how to make very efficient supply chains. Like, why not bring in that collaborative thought? And I think it's a really neat way of being able to diversify who you're bringing in your bench, as you say. But also, and we're seeing it more with our enterprise clients too, and our larger clients, and bigger brands actually, they have very inherently worked with the big four or very similar consultancies, but what they're wanting is that skill set, but then this slightly different skill set. So they're seeing there is a USP to bringing in people a bit more like that, which you can't necessarily get if they've had 10 years in one consultancy. They're not necessarily going to have that private sector experience or that corporate experience of being in that business. So yeah, totally with you there.
Yeah, and I think it falls quite nicely into that whole the face-off between like cost and quality, right? Because I think that, well, speaking from experience of a lot of the clients that we work with, something that always tends to come up in conversation is we're engaged with certain partners. The reason why we're talking to you is because we're just not able to find, the right quality at the cost that at the price that we need. It's, really great quality consultants that they're working with, or that that's being presented to them, but they're just, the costs are extremely high. So it's kind of like, how can you balance the two, and how can clients know that there is, you know, an ideal world where you can get, you know, a combination of the two. So we'd be keen to hear your thoughts on that, if that's something that you experience. And
of course, and I think it's definitely something we experience. I think all of us experience it in a way, because there is, again, the misconceptions around cost of freelancers. I think more often than not, one is like a big part for us that we play as an organisation is we really foster our candidates, and I think that's for two things. One, because we really value that network. Like, they are incredibly good at what they do, and for us to serve them as much as they serve us is incredibly important.
yeah.
But two, they are the exact case study that our clients want to see, which is, you can get quality. Look what they went and did here or here. They did that quality piece of work that they needed, but within your budget and within your constraints. And again, pulling out that life cycle cost. You know, a lot of our organisations that we work with are quite strategically focused in that respect, and they understand, don't get me wrong, they do understand that, you know, contingent hiring has a benefit from a cost perspective, but some still are thinking, oh, that day rate might be a bit too much for us today.
Yeah.
And it's bringing that to life and saying, look, this is the value that they produce in 3 months. You could hire someone permanently, but it's going to probably cost you the cost of their day rate over 3 months in hiring and then bringing in a permanent employee in 6 months. So it's totally up to you, you know, and I think it's very often the candidates that we have speak for themselves from the things that they've done before and the work they've done before. And very often, I don't know about you, a lot of our customers come to us because they're stuck, and not just from a quality perspective, but from I actually don't really know what we need, and we've got this problem and we need someone, and it's for us to bring that expert opinion of, we know someone who would be brilliant for that. Just talk to them, see what they say, and if it sounds about right, we can talk about the case studies they've done, or we can look again, but that provides us a more intelligent search as well, where we start to kind of identify a little bit more about our client. But be interested to hear what you do at Wave. Sorry, I keep asking.
Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, it's interesting to know from both sides. And yeah, I completely agree with you on that. I think from our side, the clients that we work with, they come to us at a time when they are stuck, and when they're either massively falling behind, you know, they're not on track, you know, at all to where they need to be. And that's why I was so keen to film this podcast, because I think if there can be more, like, I guess, education out there for stakeholders at an earlier phase, where they're just more aware of, like, the different options that are there, it just means that it doesn't have to get to the point where it's a problem to then realise that this is an option, and, you know, it can then obviously, you know, you can turn it around, and that's obviously typically what the contingent, you know, workforce will come in to do, to be able to deliver that quickly. But it just means that, you know, I guess that stress and anxiety and that can all be kind of relieved at a sooner time. But I think from our side, with like a cost and quality standpoint, I think where we operate on like a virtual bench model, it just helps us to be a lot more flexible in like the setup that we have. So, you know, we don't have like the overhead cost of a typical consultancy. We don't really work with any third party. Well, we don't work with any third parties with, you know, identifying like consultants. So, that kind of cost is passed over to the clients that we work with, right? So we're able to obviously identify the right people, arguably sometimes it can be consultants that are more experienced than those that they have access to because of this, you know, the specific skill sets, the industry experience and stuff like that. But it's just as simple as us being able to pass the overhead costs on, as opposed to kind of, I guess, having crazy margins ourselves, which obviously would be nice, but that's obviously how we come in competitive, right? To be able to, I guess, compete against other consultancies in the space. And I think it comes down to, I feel like I'm saying like education quite a lot, but it comes down to that education piece as well of, you know, when you're engaging with consultancy partners, who are you set up with, and how do they operate, and could you be working with, you know, partners that are more flexible in their costing, you know, in their cost structure, because they have setups like we do. And I think that's why we kind of initially started talking in the first place. So it's interesting to know that those kind of setups are available out there as well for clients, because I think there's always that idea of physical, you know, consultancies with physical consultants on site, and that might be the only setup. But I think from our side, we've seen that virtual bench to be just as effective for us, if not, arguably it's lower risk, and it just means that we can deliver quicker.
100%.
So,
and also, what a wonderful thing for clients to be able to go, okay, here's my ecosystem of partners, and being proactive in that approach and saying, right, okay, I've got these people for this, these people for this. It just immediately means that their options when they're in that space of, okay, we're obviously lacking a skill set in this project, I don't really quite know what it is, but I'm going to just go and speak to my partners and find out. And I think, again, having that trusted relationship, which we're really, really proud of at Fresh Minds in many ways, is we have clients call us and say, we've got this problem, we have no idea how to solve it.
Yeah.
It's not, I need this person, it's, I've got this problem, what are you thinking? And we'll sit and, we'll ideate on it, and we'll run our own proposals for organisations and be like, this is what we propose, we do, or this is kind of our consulting brains on it, what do you think? And I think that really nice approach means that they feel like they're making informed decisions rather than, okay, I really quickly need this skill set too. And I think you're quite right on the education piece. And look, our clients aren't stupid. They know their problems in their business better than we ever will. But what we can do is kind of be there as a handhold when it comes to support for hiring for the right skill set, for the right problem. And I think I'm smiling to myself because very often our candidates will speak to our clients and be like, oh, I've had this here.
Yeah.
Like, we did this approach. And they'll be like, oh, yeah, okay, interesting.
Yeah.
And it's nice because that conversation is quite useful too from our perspective. It's like, look at the quality of our candidates. Like, they've seen and done this elsewhere. And, that's always a beneficial tool, I think.
Yeah, and I think it's like you say, it's so nice to be able to have that, to have a consultative kind of conversation with your clients as opposed to just a transactional,
Totally.
helping to support hiring. As with probably permanent staffing, a lot of the time it's more so just finding the right talent for that particular role, as opposed to, looking at that, looking at the bigger picture of how, where this could add value or where this skill set could add value. It's more so kind of get the job done, find the right people, and then, off you go kind of thing. So it's nice to kind of have that and to be able to lean on.
And so many organisations are moving into skills-based hiring anyway, where they're thinking more from a, less so I'm going to need a team of X to do this, they're more so thinking, here are the projects and programmes I'm going to have going on, these are the outcomes I want to reach, and therefore what skill sets do I need to map to those outcomes, and how does that look? Over Christmas I read a book called Open Talent by John Windsor, and that talks so much about this topic, which is kind of, you've got this open market, we've got a global workforce now with such high quality skills, map the skills you need to the outcomes you want to achieve. And you'll be surprised how different your hiring approach is, because there will always be those short-term goals or those short-term outcomes that don't need necessarily a permanent hire. And again, it comes to being strategic, building that partnership or ecosystem approach, and being able to tap the right people at the right time.
Yeah, I love a good book recommendation off a podcast. I'm making a note of that before I forget.
It's a good one.
Open Talent. I always come off of the podcast with a new book to read, but no, that sounds really interesting. And it kind of leads on to my next question, which is, I guess if you are a hiring manager right now, I guess what would your advice be? You have so many options that are out there with contingent staffing, engaging with different consultancies, permanent staffing, which is often can be the preference. If it was like a blank canvas, what would you kind of recommend?
I think it sounds really obvious, but I think if I was going to kind of like my product head, I would think about kind of what outcomes are you wanting to achieve from your hiring process? Like, what is it that your business is wanting to achieve? And therefore, what kind of people does that look like? Because the minute you've kind of got skill sets, you can then identify roles, and then you can then identify how long you've got of those roles or how long you think you'll need them for. And I think where there's even a slither of risk, where you think that, and this is my personal opinion, having seen the amount of redundancies, when there's even a slither of risk around, I don't know whether I'm going to need this person past 12 months, really consider your contingent hiring options and look to the market. Who are organisations that would just love to speak to you and maybe help you untangle that problem? And I think that's both where Fresh Minds and Wave come in. It's really important to have those open conversations about, I've got this outcome, I want to achieve it. I don't think I'm going to need a team post 12 months. So therefore, I probably need a couple of skill sets or just one skill set in. What would you recommend? Or do you know of anyone who's done this before? And I think having that open dialogue without thinking you're being sold to because you're a good partner, I think that's always a really nice opportunity anyway. But yeah, I would go back to, and I'm very much a product-based thinker, but especially after doing my own startup, so I take quite a different approach to thinking about hiring. But I think it is combining your outcomes for your business, what you want to do over the next year, thinking about where your permanent roles make a lot of sense, like which are the ones that you really will need over the next couple of years, and take your time making that search relevant and right for you. But then where there's kind of those gaps and where you feel there is a risk in hiring permanently, really consider what your contingent options are, I would say.
Yeah, and I think as well, I probably see this more from my side because we are also, I guess, like a recruitment business as well as like a consultancy provider. But if I could have like a magic wand, and I could wave it over everyone, I would say for hiring managers and stakeholders to see the value in partnerships as well, because I think, a lot of people have like a bad taste in their mouth with agencies, with consultancies because of like bad experiences, and they don't necessarily see the value add or are willing to kind of invest the time into building effective relationships with the right people because, they don't necessarily see the value in it. And I think if only every client could see, when you're engaged with the right people and that understanding is, comes from both sides, how effective it can be. Like with the clients that you mentioned that you have had relationships with for years and inside out, it's like it makes it so much easier for everyone all round, right, to be able to do a good job and to deliver effectively.
Yeah. And again, it goes down to the success of us even placing someone. So if we know more about their business and we understand them, what their drivers are, what they're looking for in the next couple of years, we're more likely to have a successful placement than if we weren't. And I think, and again, it comes down to us knowing our candidate pool really well, which I think both sides of us do, but also knowing our client well enough to give them a real honest, transparent feedback on where we could help and where we maybe can't. And I think when you've got those trusted relationships and you take the time to foster those and find the right ones for you, again, I think I've said ecosystem about 20 times, but I genuinely mean it. I think having a really strong array of partners that you can use as your toolkit to say, okay, I've got this problem, probably these two people are going to know a bit more about how I might be able to solve it. That just makes you more resilient as a business as well. I mean, I think for my organisation, I would have loved that. For Ditto, if we'd grown a bit a bit bigger, I think it would have been a wonderful tool for us to be able to say, okay, we need probably this kind of contingent hire over the next 2 months, 3 months. What does that look like for us? Maybe I need to pick up the phone to someone I really trust and ask their opinion, who have seen this happen in 6 other businesses in the last 6 months, Yeah. So it's a really good option as well for just testing out your brain and soundboarding a problem.
Yeah, it just helps you to advise better, doesn't it? To actually going back to that kind of consultative piece and just being able to really add value beyond just like deploying the right people into projects, which is important. And I think if it was more, I guess, valued across the industry, like external partnerships and stuff like that, I think that people would be surprised with how much knowledge they could also gain, right, from engaging with the right people. And there's always new perspectives and different set of eyes on the same problem can really help to kind of, I guess, like untangle things that might be tangled up for quite a while.
Yeah,
so it's
exactly. And I think there's always a lesser risk too.
Yeah.
To that organisation, if you're not quite sure and you want to test something, again, it's a bit like a product-based approach. It's test, iterate, try again. But this does mean that you can bring on someone for a short period of time, then do that piece of work, and you've got the option to go, do I want that skill set more permanently, or do I not? Have they done exactly what I need them to do, and then that's done, or actually, if I now realised I need that skill set to do these 4 other things, you wouldn't have known that until you brought someone in, and that's so much harder to do with a permanent employee. So I think that also allows you to build more understanding of what you need as a business too. Yeah.
And do you work with your clients with, I guess, with handing over those projects as well? So once they then want to invest more into like their permanent hires or the long-term growth, how does that then,
100%.
How do you kind of approach that?
Very much so. So very similar to Wave, actually, we keep a really open dialogue with our clients throughout any project. So, we'll see how it's going for 1. 2, we'll speak to our candidates, see what they're able to derive from it. But also 3, like when it comes to the project closure, I mean, a lot of the work we do is project management, strategy. We do a lot of reports at the end to say, this is what we found, this is what we delivered, but this is what we recommend you do next. And I think that those candidates, the beauty of it, and I think it's always quite an interesting subtle stigma around consultancy, is they always have a second agenda, which is they're going to land more work, land and expand. It's a typical consultancy approach. The beauty of our candidates, they've got nothing to lose. For them, they're not tied to that kind of stigma, because for them, it's not on them to deliver more work for the business. For them, it's to do a really good job.
Yeah.
So I think we get a really good reputation for having a really, really honest approach to the work or recommendations that we have next, because there's really nothing that they would gain from trying to subtly push for more work for us, So I think for us, very much so, a recommendations piece just tends to be our next approach. But also keeping that relationship open, dialing them a couple of months after the project ends and says, how did it go? We had a call the other day from a client saying that they were using a piece of work that we'd done for them maybe a year ago or 6 months ago now, and they're using it to inform 3 massive events that they're doing.
Yeah.
It will be kind of the absolute thing that they're going to do over those 3 events is inform everyone about the work we did. So I think it's really nice to keep that open approach, because you think, 1, I love that we're not shelfware, but 2, I also love to hear kind of where did it go? What does that next mean? What does that mean for your business next? But also, how can we help with the consultative process going forward? That feels very honest, just based on the way that we work.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. I never looked at it like that with the candidates, I guess, agenda in those projects as well, right? Because it just allows them to completely focus on the work at hand, and then ultimately means that they can deliver better, more effectively, which always leaves a good, I guess, impression with the clients that you're working with. 100%. So, I mean, that is probably something subconsciously, obviously we do, but I didn't even kind of think of it in that way. So it makes a lot of sense. Yeah. But no, thank you. It's been really interesting to kind of talk to you and to run through all of these points. I think, like I say, to be able to showcase this more across the industry, and it's just all about creating awareness around these topics, because it is only something that's ever really spoke about at a time where there is a huge problem or there's a lot of stress, and people need to kind of retrieve where they've gone wrong and to act quickly. But it's something that, if considered as an option more earlier on, and if people are just more aware of how they can also engage with talent in different ways, it can just help people to be more creative and to build more effectively. I'm not too sure if there's anything else specifically that kind of stood out from your side alongside those main points that we have discussed, of like the quality, the speed, the partnerships, the relationships that you wanted to finish on at all, or if you feel like those are the main kind of the main things that people should kind of take a look into and to think about a bit more.
Gosh, no, I think you've covered so many things, Daisy. So I think it's been such a fascinating discussion, but also because I'm a bit of a nerd with this respect, I think we both are. But I think also one thing that stands out actually is just how different this approach is to kind of the management consultancies of many years past. I think this is a very future of work focused. How can you get those skill sets in when you need them in a way that doesn't drive up costs but also gets you results? And I think that's where the future of work is going, especially with freelancers. I read a really interesting stat the other day that said that 90% of freelancers are not interested in ever taking another in-house role, which is fascinating. Yeah. I think that in itself is something to consider as an organisation. That's where the skill sets are going to lie. So how can you tap into that most effectively, and how can you as a business start setting up partnerships that will help you do that effectively? It's been a brilliant discussion. Thank you so much. Yeah,
thank you. No, it's been really good to talk, and I'm excited to kind of share it with our clients. I think also, obviously, where everything that we do is very much, digital technology, product led. I'm sure that there'd be, use of your services within projects that we're probably engaged in right now that, once that awareness is there, could hopefully help to open up some conversations as well. So, thank you.
Thank you.